we come home, we close the garage door before we get out, or quickly go down and grab our mail, and we're not really looking up and trying to engage with other people. And we never really thought that it could be different until we started hearing about what is a missional community. And it's so much beyond just a Bible study or small group. It's a balance between we are focusing on our relationships with God, and we're really developing authentic, deep community.
Welcome to Mom's Grab Coffee, where you'll be filled with wisdom, faith, and hope through real testimonies from moms of how God works in our lives. I'm your host, Hannah Lapsansky, and I invite you to pull up a chair, grab a cup of coffee, and get ready, my friend. We're about to speak the truth. Hey, my lovely mom friend. I hope your June is kicking off to a really great start. If you have kids that are about to get on summer break, or maybe they've already gone on summer break, hope that transition is going well. You know, summer's always exciting. You have vacations, you have barbecues, you have just lots of things to do. And I love how people spend so much time outside, whether you're going to the park or it's just in your own neighborhood. People are just out and about enjoying the sunshine. So that brings me to the topic of the day. And that is how to start connecting with your neighbors and building a community. I'm joined by Twyla Franz, a missional living extraordinaire over at The Uncommon Normal. And her whole purpose is helping imperfectly ready people take baby steps into neighborhood missional living. She'll go a little bit more into what that actually means, but the whole idea is to find ways to start connecting with those around you and building a community. And that could mean making mom friends, right? That can be so hard. I live in a neighborhood with lots of young families. And when I moved here, I was really excited thinking that I would make mom friends right away, but I didn't. It's still been a challenge trying to find friends around me. But this conversation has made me realize that I'm not taking the baby steps in order to build those relationships with those who are living right around me. So I got a lot out of this conversation. There are tactics that she shares that I'm going to use right away. So I hope you get a lot out of this. Even if you don't live in a neighborhood, maybe you live in an area where neighbors are really far away. She's going to talk about how we can still find and build that community if you're in that kind of situation. So this will still be really relevant to you. And she'll also go over some resources that will also be really helpful. And lastly, she's going to share how she brings God into the conversation with non-believers. We want to be the salt of the earth. We want to be the light in the world, right? However, it can be a little awkward to bring God into a conversation when you know that person is not necessarily a believer. How do we even approach that? So she's going to talk about what she does. And I think it's a really practical and gentle way to be able to share what God has done and is doing in your life with someone who, you know, may not believe or may even have a bad taste when they find out that you're a Christian. So I'm really excited for this. Let's get into it. This is Twyla's story. All right, so Twyla, let's jump in with the definition of missional living. What does that actually mean?
Well, I'll start with the way that I've defined it on my website, and that's just posturing our hearts like an open door. I'm a visual person, so I like to imagine this door open where we're welcoming our neighbors into our hearts and our homes and our lives so that we can integrate discipleship into the small everyday moments of doing life together with our neighbors. But in really simple terms, it's basically just a ripple effect way of living where we understand that the things that God's working out inside of us are not meant just to be kept for us. And we can share honest, vulnerable, messy stories and how God's reorienting our hearts through them, and just let what God is doing inside of us ripple out beyond us.
I love that idea. I mean, just reaching out to neighbors, whether they're believers or non-believers, and just showing them the love of God that we have. I think is so beautiful. So what brought you to that realization that you needed a community? Because now you've kind of dedicated your life to this idea of missional living. You have several resources on your site that talk about how we can live this out. So what kind of brought you to realize that that's your purpose?
Well, community has always been a big part of our lives. We were part of community groups or small groups. Different churches will call them a different name, but basically a smaller group that it breaks out apart from the normal weekend service. So that was always really big for us. But it was not until a few years ago that we were kind of introduced to this concept of what a missional community is. And we were part of one, which was wonderful, but it was also a drive to get there. And it, in some ways, was a little bit more of this is still just another event that I'm going to once a week. And it was no fault of the group. It was amazing. The discipleship that happened was incredible, but just because we were not proximity close, we weren't bumping into each other all during the week as easily as you are if you're kind of a neighborhood-based group. So we had this longing in our hearts. We knew a few other groups through our church that were neighborhood-based, and we're like, God, this is something we really, really just feel this stirring in our hearts. We want to lean into this. But at that time we were renting this really small house on a very busy street. And we lived there for years. We know, maybe a handful of neighbors on a first name basis. And that was it. Most of the neighbors had never been inside of our houses. We'd never been in theirs. It was just like we're living life alongside of them, but we were not really crossing paths and interacting. And that's the way that it just is in a lot of neighborhoods where we come home, we close the garage door before we get out, or, we quickly go down and grab our mail, and we're not really looking up and trying to engage with other people. And when we don't see other people outside, it's just really hard to connect with them. But we never really thought that it could be different until we started hearing about what is a missional community. And it's so much beyond just a Bible study or small group. It's kind of this balance between we are focusing on our relationships with God, and we're really developing authentic, deep community. And then we have a mission where we're serving and we are moving out beyond the group and we're reaching out to other people. And so it's this whole balance that I think a lot of the other groups we'd been part of previously had been maybe strong in one or two of them, but it's a way of life that they're kind of all intertwined together. So we just put this dream on hold, though. We're like, okay, we're part of this group that we're driving to, but we really want to start something and host it out of our home. And we just thought, well, someday we'll move, we'll have a bigger house, we'll have space to host. Because at that point, our table wasn't big enough to really squish more than one extra person in if we finangled it. And it just seemed a little impossible at that point. But looking back, I wish we hadn't waited. We did eventually move and started, on a new, like, wiped clean slate. But I wish that we hadn't waited. I wish we had spent more time just being outside and valuing the people that were right next to us. We lived right next to a park. Like there's so many things that we would have done differently had we known what we know today, that really it doesn't have to be a perfect house. It doesn't have to be a big house. You don't have to feel all the way ready by any means, but that's kind of where we started, was just learning about it and hearing how some other people were putting this into practice, and said, God, how is this going to happen, and leaning into that.
I love that you said making it a way of life. I mean, living in community, being close to people who are actually close to you can make such a big difference in our lives. But whatever stage of life we're in, there are so many reasons not to engage with someone, whether they live in our neighborhood or not. A lot of the stuff you mentioned that are tangible, like, oh, my house is too small, or maybe I don't even have a yard. Like, where would people hang out, because I don't have the space for it, to looking at yourself and being really nervous about, well, I don't know what to say, or I don't really, I have a hard time connecting with people. So how did you get past those kinds of deterrents to take that first step to reach out?
Sure. And that's a great question because I think so many of us do feel like we have to be ready before we start. And I think
Hmm.
that's the biggest mindset shift that we had to go through is our house is not going to be perfect. Yes, we moved into a house that was much larger, but that also meant that our little bit of furnishing that we brought from the small house did not remotely fill up the larger house. And it was a project house. There still years later is ongoing things that we are cleaning and fixing and all that sort of thing. So I think in some ways, living in a very humble rental property that often didn't look clean, if even if it was clean, there was scratched up linoleum and all sorts of things that really were a humility pill whenever we would invite people into our home. I think that kind of prepared our hearts just to let go of my house has to look perfect, my life has to be put together, and like I have to have this all together in order to open up. But just really stepping back and being relational and real and saying, hey, I mean, this is the way that my house is. You're welcome to come in, and how that just breaks down some of those barriers because most people's houses are not clean all the time. Most
Hmm.
people have projects that are going on and things they wish they could change
Yeah.
about their house. And so basically we just started opening up our lives, and I'm naturally much more introverted. And for me too, it was just realizing that this isn't a shift that I have to make one huge giant leap. Like we're not going to go from
Mm-hmm.
where we are right now to this vision, this huge vision where we have these community meals and we're opening up our home and we know our neighbors. Like it's not going to happen overnight, but that doesn't mean we have to give up on it. It can be, here's the direction that we want to go, and we're going to start taking these little steps, and we're just going to keep leaning in. And Caesar Kalinowski, he's someone that I learned a whole lot about missional living from. He has a question that he just says, what's next, God? Like, where are you showing up?
Mm-hmm.
Where can I join you in what you're already doing? And just this openness of, okay, I took that step. What's next? And what's next? Instead of being intimidated by the whole big picture, just starting small in these little ways. And it looked like just spending a lot more time out in our front yard and walking the neighborhood and leaning into the conversation. So when there were people out stopping and asking them, what's your dog's name? Or what project are you working on? And um, my husband would offer to share tools, or if there's a neighbor that clearly had an expertise in an area that was not ours, just asking questions and leaning into their wisdom. And it might be lawn care or woodworking or something that is not our strength. And so just inviting their stories and being willing to learn. I think just those little heart shift things of, instead of keeping to ourselves, that the direction that we really want to go is to be really relational and to get to know our neighbors. And so it's just in these little ways, and these conversations would happen, and then before you know it, kids are riding bikes together and we're inviting people into our homes and we're going in their homes. And it just becomes a lot of neighbor families that begin to feel like family.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think we all like to get there. And I like the fact that you said just taking that next step. It's a little thing. It's one question that could open the door, um, that can then blossom into a deep relationship. But just that one question, making that choice to be outside, to walk the neighborhood, to stop even, because I see
Mm-hmm.
neighbors out and about. And a lot of times my default is, oh, I don't want to bother them, or, oh, they look busy, so I'm just going to, walk by. Or on my side, oh, I got to get home and make dinner. I don't have time to stop and talk. But
Mm-hmm.
we might be
Yes,
overestimating what those little things can do and how much time it actually takes, right? It's just opening that door. It's
definitely.
not like you have to sit there and have an hour-long conversation with someone in your neighborhood. It's just, all right, maybe we invest the 2 minutes to ask them a question today. So that
Mm-hmm.
next time, we're taking that next step, that next building block of just relationship building.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great point. Like it doesn't always have to take a lot of time, but I think it's just that heart posture, and it comes out in our face expressions. And are we excited to see a neighbor that pulls in the driveway next to us, or doors down, and we also were right at the, kind of right at the opening of our neighborhood. So there's a street that comes down and then you can either go right or left. So we taught our kids early on, like, hey, when cars are coming in, like, let's wave, let's smile, let's wave. They may be neighbors coming in. They may be a UPS truck or somebody that's just coming in to visit. But our 1-year-old at the time, he would just smile and wave. And it was really cool to see that this is a rhythm that we want to show our kids, that we want to be welcoming. We want to invite relationships. We really want to get to know our neighbors. And so it can just, I think it can show in all those little nonverbals as well.
Yeah. Even the simple act of waving almost feels, it feels so natural for a child to do it. But as adults, if we see someone waving at us, our reaction is probably, wait, do they know me? Do I know them? Should I know them? It doesn't feel like a natural thing as adults. I don't know why. But I love that. Just again, going back to the little things, waving, asking one question, even saying hello. I love that. So going back to the journey of building your community, realistically, how long did it take for you to feel like you built up those relationships?
I think it was a few months before we started to feel like we really knew some people well. And it wasn't everybody at the same time. There was already a stronger sense of community here than maybe there is in a typical neighborhood. So there were things that we could join that were already going on. We have a Facebook page. We have other neighbors that would open their garage and there would be gatherings there. There's different pockets throughout the neighborhood that they were already knowing each other very well and kind of living in community. So part of it was what we were doing. Part of it was joining what was already going on and just leaning into those intentional relationships. So when we connected with somebody, we're like, I think we're on the same page. Like we're clicking. We started inviting some of those families. At the time, we were co-hosting our missional community. We still are, but we were meeting at their house, which is a neighborhood over. So we started inviting a handful of neighbor families here to join us over there for what we were already doing. And it was, I can't remember exactly how many months, but it was maybe 6 months at the most before we moved the meeting location to our house and were able to invite more neighbors because it was in walking distance and it was just a little easier. But yeah, it slowly grew over time, but there were definitely families that we connected with pretty early on that pretty quickly became good friends.
And it sounds like you and your husband were in partnership together to build this community.
And it helps too that the kids will find, oh, well, these kids we have a lot in common with, or they live super close to us and we also go to the same school, and just finding out what other people are doing and what their stories are. You can say, oh, well, they're at school and they're also at soccer and they're also here, or they're also at dance. And those little connections where we have these overlapping circles, we may have far more of those with our neighbors than we realize, but we would never know until we get to know them well enough to know, hey, what's important to you? What's mattering to you? What are you part of? What are your kids doing on these weekly basis?
Yeah, love that. So within your neighborhood, I'm going to guess not everyone is a believer. So how do you bring in your faith and kind of showcase the love you have for God to non-believers within your community?
I honestly think it really comes back to not just the things that we're doing, but being really super tethered to God and letting it be just this deep knowing that our identity is what ripples out into the way that we live. It's not trying to fit a certain lifestyle. It's not trying to look like a quote unquote good Christian, but it's choosing to walk in humility and choosing to stay really proximate to God, where those things just kind of become this natural overflow. So we're not trying to put on a show, like we're breaking down the walls and just opening up and being real about, hey, I struggle with this some days too, and this is what God's teaching me through it. I think when we just try to pretend like we're perfect all the time, that it can push people away, and bringing God up, not in a way to sound preachy, but in a way that, hey, I'm not perfect either. Here's how God's growing me, or here's something that I'm praying about, or this is what I'm worrying about and why I'm turning to God in it. And it can just be like these casual ways that you slip it in, because it's a part of your story. So it just kind of ebbs out into normal conversation and whatever you're saying. And another thing that I like to keep in mind is to not push words ahead of people, but to be highly relational, because I think Christians can sometimes get a bad rap of being very judgmental. And in some ways, I think that comes from, we can't try to be an accountability partner to somebody that we don't even have a strong relationship with. Like, we can't expect somebody else to live like Jesus if that's not where they are yet. And we certainly shouldn't be telling them how to live differently if we don't even know their stories. We don't know them. And so I think being highly relational, finding out their stories, those conversations where you're talking about what God's doing in you, can come across as, well, you're just opening up your life and being real with me. You're not judging me for what I'm doing or not doing. You're just being real about the areas that you need to grow. And so it doesn't feel intimidating. I don't think in the same way, just because you're just sharing stories, you're just getting to know each other. And this is part of my story. And I'm not judging you. I'm just, opening up about how I'm not perfect either. And this is how I need Jesus in my day-to-day life.
Yeah, I love that so much, because I think, if people have that preconceived notion that, Christians are judgmental, and you are absolutely not, and you're listening there intentionally and loving them, they're like, wait a minute, maybe Christians aren't so judgmental, or there's something different about Twyla. Even those nonverbals we were waving, like, oh, wait, something's different about her. And I've come across people like that in my life where I didn't even know they were Christian, but they emanated something different, just a very deep level of joy. And I actually, went and asked them about it, or, looked them up, kind of stalkery, but like, who is this person? Why are they so joyful? I'm like, oh, okay, they're a Christian. And I think that's so amazing. So it's not like you have to push it in their face, but it's through these other gentle ways that you can actually seed a relationship with God for them.
Definitely, definitely. And we do want to live our life in a way that people want to ask questions, like the joy that you were saying, or the way that we can walk through something hard and it not completely derail us because we're grounded in Christ. Like we want to live in a way that people want to know what is the secret.
Yeah. And not putting up a front too, not, always looking happy is not it. Because like you said, being real, being raw is also important as well. Love that. So Twyla, I want to ask you, for people who don't live in a neighborhood, maybe they do, and there's just not a sense of community. What do you think they should do to start building a community for themselves?
Sure. And that's a great question. It's one that I actually brought up. I did a series a while back on my blog that was obstacles to this lifestyle of missional living. And what do you do if your house is small, or you're an introvert, or your husband's not on board, or you don't live in a neighborhood? And a lot of the things that we're talking about with intentionality can be applied to other circles that you're in. And sometimes you might have to look at your workplace or your school, or where are these different places where you're seeing people regularly, because community can happen in those circles just like they can with literal neighbors. Or maybe everybody's just more spread out. It's more farm country and you have neighbors, but they're miles away. Again, it can just take more intentionality, because people are not necessarily going to drive past and see if you're outside. So it may be stopping over with, hey, I baked these for you. We live nearby. I just, love to know who my neighbors are. And that can feel really super uncomfortable. But I think if we want it bad enough, to start in just little ways and start making taking some of those awkward invitations because they're going to feel really super awkward. But it may be stopping over and saying, hey, just want to let you know, here's my cell phone if you ever need anything, or if you're short an egg and you need something, like stop here, don't run 20 miles to the store. Like I'm, more than happy to share those everyday things that we all run out of sometimes. I think just taking that first step and just noticing the people around us, whether that's people in our neighborhood or people we're going to school with or working with or at church with, or wherever those circles are where we find ourselves most often. I think just honestly opening our eyes and paying attention is one of the best places to start, because when we start to see people and then we make them feel visible because they feel seen, it just does something, I think, deep inside of us, because we want to feel seen. We want to feel like somebody cares, that somebody notices that we're here, that we don't have to be anything special or spectacular. We all have this deep need, I think, to connect on a deep relational level, and making people feel valued can go a long ways toward building those relationships.
Absolutely. So Twyla, I want to ask you, living in community obviously has tons of positive impacts to us, our family, our marriage, as well as our faith when we tie the community back to God. So how has your missional community and your work building that impacted your faith?
Sure. And I want to come back to just this idea of staying super proximate to Jesus. Sometimes I think that we try to replicate this effect of having a close relationship and then forget the piece that we actually have to stay in really close connection with him. And so I think that is one of the ways that it impacts me the most, is knowing that I can't put up a front, I can't put on a show, I can't just pretend this if I'm not willing to actually have the rhythms in my life where I'm coming regularly to Jesus. So for me, that looks like having a morning routine. And that's something that I steered clear of for many years, just because it felt restrictive. And I wanted to just pick up my Bible whenever I had time. And that worked pre-kids and, before all these other demands on my schedule. When I was just a college student living by myself in a dorm room, I could do that. But more recently, just realizing my morning routine affects the way that I parent. It affects how I approach marriage. It affects how I interact with my neighbors. It affects everything, because if I'm putting Jesus into my day, and another piece of my morning routine is keeping an ongoing gratitude list. And I've found that just staying in the Word, staying in prayer, even if it's just a few verses that I'm reading, is that I can meditate on throughout the day and be asking God, what do you want to show me through this? That it keeps me tethered to him. That's one of the biggest impacts that has come out of this, just for my personal faith and relationship with God, is that I can't write about this. I can't tell other people to do this if I'm not willing to actually stay committed and stay tethered.
Yeah. And I think the other part of that is obedience. So if you're asking God for a community, if you're asking God for mom friends, God may deliver those moments, but we have to take the choice to ask the question to that person, or to wave hi, or to start taking those tiny steps to build the community when God presents those opportunities.
Definitely. Yeah, I think of the verse like that. We don't want to just be hearers of the word, but we want to be doers, and how it is this, like, it's not just supposed to be head knowledge. I think a lot of what we learn is in the doing and in following him in obedience, like you were saying, even when we don't feel like we're doing it all the way perfectly, or that we're all the way prepared, just trusting that he's going to fill in the places where we lack, and he wants us to need him. Like, he knows that it's not something that we can do on our own, and it's supposed to be that way because he wants us to need him all throughout a day. And most of us don't feel brave. Like, we don't feel like we can be the one to put ourselves out there or to make those invitations, but it's not something that he asks us to do on ourselves, on our own, but it's, hey, will you step with me into the next thing right before you, and I'm going to be right with you. And can you be brave with me? Because it's not all you by yourself. Like, we're doing this together.
Yeah. Well, Twyla, I'm excited to go walk my neighborhood and ask some questions because that's something that I really don't do because I feel so, tunnel vision to what I need to do next after this walk. But I'm excited. You also have a devotional, so-called Cultivating a Missional Life, 30-day devotional to gently help you open your heart, home, and life to your neighbors. That gives you more of what we're talking about here. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So I have a website that I blog every week, and it's different topics that all tie into this idea of missional living. But a couple of years ago, I just had this idea that I wanted to make it as simple and straightforward and easy as possible. And it's short. Every devotional is little bite-sized pieces. The paperback of the devotional itself is nearly pocket-sized. So it's not something that's a major commitment to read, but it will gently turn your heart in these little ways toward your neighbors and toward the things that God might want to bring you into that's already happening in your neighborhood.
Beautiful.
It's 30 days where I'm walking with you and I'm holding your hand and I'm gently introducing these rhythms that can be really powerful at changing your life and reorienting the direction that you're going.
I love that, especially because it's summer and large parts of the country are getting warmer. If it was, cold season before, which means people are more prone to be out and about, including ourselves, which invites those opportunities to connect. So taking 30 days in the summer to get yourself out there, it can change your whole year.
It sure can. And then there's questions at the end that go along. It's broken up into 6 different weeks. So you can either use the questions as your own personal reflection, or you can actually do it with a small group.
Awesome. Amazing. Twyla, I always like to end the episode asking what our guests would like to say to moms who are just in a moment of struggle. They want the community, they want the mom friends, but they just can't seem to break through. What's something you'd like to say to them?
Sure. I think just knowing that it's not just you can be really freeing, because so many of us can feel lonely, even if we are surrounded by other people. And I think there's that tug just to go deeper with our people, and it's not even, I think, so much having more friends, but it's having real friends, these deeper friends that know so much about you. I think just getting started is honestly the best thing that you can do. Realize that it's going to be awkward. It's going to be messy. But if you start becoming the friend that you are looking for, you're going to find your people. And another resource that I can point moms to that's been very, very, very helpful for me is Jenny Allen recently released this book, Find Your People, that is incredible at walking you through very specific tools for how you can find your village and you can find this inner circle of friends. And she has a book club. There's actually a group of us here in the neighborhood that we've been listening to her podcast. And so we started a book club on the book, and it's been really, really, really super helpful. So that would be another thing that you could do, say, hey, there's this book that I'm interested in reading. Would you be interested in reading it with me? We can try this for 12 weeks and just invite people to a book club, because maybe that feels a little less intimidating than, hey, just come on over and let's let our kids play. So that would definitely be another thing that I would recommend.
Amazing. Awesome, Twyla. Well, it has been such a pleasure. I'm excited to kick off my summer with all of these tips you shared. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
That was Twyla Franz of The Uncommon Normal. And I hope that the community and relationship building tips that she shared today are going to be things that you can start doing right away. One of the things that stood out to me was not getting intimidated by the whole picture. If we take the picture of building a relationship, it can feel a little bit intimidating in that it takes work, it takes effort. Sometimes we have so much going on with our own lives and our kids, our marriages, that our plates already feel too full. But we still long to have that community, right? We still long to have mom friends. So take a step back from trying to paint the entire picture and just start with one tiny piece. And that is a question that could be just a simple hi, that could be just getting outside. So the opportunities to talk to people or just say that hi present themselves. So decide this summer, what piece are you going to put into practice? And once you get comfortable with that, again, maybe it's just a hi. Once you get comfortable saying hi, then you can move on to the next piece. And before you know it, you're going to start building the blocks towards a solid, authentic relationship. To connect with Twyla, I will have links to her website as well as her social channels. She also mentioned a few resources that will be really helpful in your community building journey, so I'll also have those links in the show notes. Thanks so much for joining me today, friend. Next week, I am meeting with Tabitha Yates, and we are going to talk about mental health as it relates to the church. It is going to be a fantastic conversation that might challenge your thinking, so make sure you're subscribed to the show wherever you are listening to Mom's Grab Coffee. And also, if you are enjoying the show and you're listening to it on Apple or Spotify, I would so appreciate it if you could take a quick second to write a review or just rate the show. That really helps with podcast search results, rankings, and that kind of thing. Thanks so much, friend. I'm Hannah Lapsansky, and I'll catch you again next week for a cup of coffee with a side of faith, wisdom, and hope.